Hi, my name is Patrick Reagan. Welcome to the Operating Systems Linux, where we cover how to install, manage, and use the Linux operating system. In Part 2, Installing Linux, including Ubuntu installation, the general process to install Linux is covered into downloading Linux and creating a bootable Linux installation USB drive. It covers the system requirements for several Linux distros and demonstrates how to install Ubuntu Linux. For those who are going to take the A+ exam, there is a practice questions toward the end of the video. Before you install Linux, you need to ensure that you have the minimum hardware necessary to install and run Linux. This screen shows the system requirements for Ubuntu, Debian, and Red Hat Linux. Generally speaking, you should have 2 or more core processors, 4 GB or more memory, and 25 GB or more free disk space. If you're going to be using the system for production, you should consider a minimum of quad-core processors, 8 GB of memory, and 80 GB of free disk space. Here are the general steps to install Linux on your computer. Choose and download a Linux distro. Create a bootable installation media. You can use Rufus to create a bootable Linux installation USB drive from the ISO image file. Boot your Linux installation media. You may need to adjust the BIOS settings to boot from the Linux installation media. Install Linux by run the installer and choose how to configure Linux. You can configure systems to dual boot between Windows and Linux. However, with virtual machines, it's easier and more efficient to use virtual machines so that you can run Windows and Linux simultaneously. If you want to turn on your computer and install Linux, you'll need to download an image of the Linux distro and create a bootable USB drive. It is recommended to use Rufus to create the bootable USB drive. To use Rufus to create the bootable Linux USB drive for installation, you would then download the ISO image and then double-click the Rufus executable. After you verify the USB device you want to install the image to, you use the Select button to select the ISO image and click Start. For the Red Hat ISO, it warns that this ISO file is an ISO hybrid image. You should select Write in ISO image mode and click OK. You're also prompted to download additional files. You should click Yes. The last step before you start creating the drive is that you are warned it will erase everything on the USB drive. Click OK to continue. You then click Close. UEFI Secure Boot is a verification mechanism for ensuring that code launched by a computer UEFI firmware is trusted. Designed to protect the system against malicious code being loaded and executed early in the boot process before the operating system has been loaded. Today, most if not all mainstream Linux distros support Secure Boot, including Ubuntu, Debian, Red Hat, Fedora, OpenSUSE, and CentOS. If you use a Linux version that does not support Secure Boot, you'll have to disable Secure Boot in the BIOS setup program before you can use or install Linux. To start the installation of Ubuntu Linux, you would boot from the Linux installation drive. It starts loading the Grub bootloader so that you can view various boot options. Grub, short for GNU Grand Unified Bootloader, is a bootloader and boot manager program for Linux. To perform the installation, you would use the Try or Install Ubuntu option. You can also use the same option to run Ubuntu from the installation drive without actually installing Linux. You would select your language and click Install Ubuntu. You will then specify your keyboard layout. If you want to perform a minimum installation or install additional software that comes with the Linux distro, and if you want to upgrade Linux to the newest version by downloading the updated files during the installation process. Some distributions of Linux requires an internet connection to perform the installation, such as Red Hat Enterprise, and some distributions will significantly increase the time to install Linux. For my Ubuntu installation, I ended up disabling networking, which reduced the installation from several hours to 40 minutes. Next, you will have the option to erase disk and install Ubuntu. If I was running a Linux server, I may break up the disk structure, but as a basic workstation, I'm just going to install Linux on the default partition that it will create. I click Continue to write to disk. Select your time zone. Specify your user count and computer name. The installation program will create the ext4 file system on the disk. Next, it will start copying files and actually install the Linux operating system. When the installation is complete, you reboot Linux. After Linux boots, you log in with your user account. It will run a wizard to finalize some settings in Linux for the user account, and you are then ready to use Linux. Question: true or false? All Linux distributions support secure boot. Answer: false. For more information, visit these sites. In summary, when installing Linux, always look at the minimum recommended system requirements. You would then look at the load that the Linux system will need to perform. The general steps to install Linux include: choose and download a Linux distro, create bootable installation media, boot your Linux installation media, and install Linux by running the installer. You may need to adjust the BIOS settings to boot from the Linux installation media. Not all distributions of Linux support secure boot. Thank you for watching this video. The next two videos will demonstrate how to install Debian and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Following the installation videos, there will be configuring Linux. Thank you.